The king of clay, Rafael Nadal, has shown everyone once again how it's done. Before the final, a lot of people thought that, hey, maybe Casper Ruud is a bit of a clay court specialist, might just be able to push Nadal to some degree. Even if he doesn't win the final, he might be able to actually have a good showing against someone who is quite clearly the benchmark when it comes to clay court tennis. But as it turns out, that wasn't quite the case, and Rafael Nadal breezed to what was arguably the easiest victory I have seen in quite some time when it comes to his French Open victories, final victories. In fact, I would venture out and say that this is probably the easiest Grand Slam title win he's had in recent memory. Such was the dominance with which. This took place. In case you're wondering, yes, that is indeed Sidvi who's running to and fro. I thought I'd just show that to you guys. Anyway, so this was definitely not one of those finals that you'd write home about. Not a final for the ages. Definitely not one of those finals which 10 years back we're gonna go back and say, you know what, this is an absolute epic classic. No, it was one-sided domination at its finest, epitomized by the fact that the final set Nadal ended up winning via a bagel, which means 6-0. I mean 6-3, 6-3, 6-0. That's about as comprehensive a victory as can come. And it sounds more like the scoreline of a first or second round match for Nadal rather than the final. But such was the dominance that Nadal had over Casper Ruud that, well, it did indeed seem like one of those matches. I mean, a lot of us anticipated that the match could go on. What, it started at 6 o'clock India time. We thought maybe it could go on till around 10, 10:30. I mean, it's 9:04 right now and I'm live with you guys. So, I mean, that itself tells you just how quickly this final was wrapped up. And in fact, it carries on the trend which started yesterday during the women's finals, even Iga Swiatek managed to absolutely breeze past Coco Gauff. Very, very easy match for her. And the same thing happened with Rafa here. I mean, it never looked like it was even for 1 second in doubt. I mean, I could start picking apart where exactly the things went wrong for Casper Ruud. But the truth be told, well, there wasn't really much that went right for him to begin with. I mean, even early in the match, when we talked about, I remember in the preview, Sidvi and I were talking and saying that, Casper Ruud would have to come out all guns blazing, maybe try and get that first set, push Nadal on the back foot. Well, that never really happened. Even when, Casper Ruud ended up getting a break, Nadal just broke right back and then broke another time, saying, "Look, kid, I'm the boss here. I'm the final boss when it comes to clay. So if you want to be the next king of clay, you have to go through me." And as it turns out, Ruud really didn't have. Ruud looked, as I said yesterday about Coco Gauff, I'm going to say the same thing about Ruud. He looked like a player who was playing in his first ever Grand Slam final. It showed. After a point, he did seem very overawed, not just by the situation, but also he was facing and playing against Rafael Nadal, who, at this point, just the name inspires fear and respect, especially when you're playing on clay courts. So Nadal had it very easy in that regard. So, he didn't really have to break much of a sweat. Yes, there were times when Ruud looked like, he did play some good tennis in patches. Of course, the key word here is that he was playing it in patches, so wasn't exactly that, he wasn't needed to turn it up to the next level. But that is Nadal, of course. But when it came to Ruud, he was good in patches. He had some nice, pretty shots. But too often than not, he was struggling to actually get a consistent run of points going up against Nadal. And, it just seemed like, he didn't look like he was in the game. And by the time he had lost the first two sets, it appeared that he had pretty much given up. And yes, that is indeed against Sidvi running. Just so we're clear. Anyway, I think I'll take a few comments now. Let's check it out. Yes, Saraj Chandra, I agree with you that even any god in the world couldn't beat Nadal on clay courts. Absolutely. And yes, Shobham Kokja, I agree with you. That was indeed an easy peasy win. Ikpreet, agree with you too. It was like an India-Scotland match. Yes, I agree if you're talking about cricket. And yes, Lavrami, convincing win and a final win in style. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we all knew that it would be a win for Nadal, but I don't think anyone expected it to be this easy. Piyush Plavan says, records are meant to be broken. Well, good luck to anyone trying to win 14 Roland Garros titles. Yes, as we were mentioning in our preview show, Pete Sampras won 14 Grand Slams in his career, and that was considered the benchmark for career Grand Slam wins. Rafa has won 14 on just one surface itself. So it's, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy when you think about it. The man is a freak of nature. He's playing with basically one good foot at this point and a myriad of injuries in every other part of his body. And he's still able to churn out French Open wins as if it was 2005 and he's, in the peak of his powers. Abhishek Singh says at this age it would do good for him to win all the Grand Slams in a year. That would just be crazy. I mean, last year Novak came this close to doing it. But whether or not he will actually get, that calendar slam, let's see. Love Rami says Wimbledon and US Open also incoming and loading. I'm not too sure he'll play in Wimbledon, honestly. As of now, there's not much surety in that regard because remember, Wimbledon, there's not going to be any ATP ranking points associated with the tournament. So I suspect there will be players who won't necessarily be going over there just because it's Wimbledon. But again, let's wait and see. I think if he does indeed go over there, you'd be hard pressed to argue that anyone but him was the favorite. And yes, Lavrami, you were right. You did in fact point out in our live chat yesterday that today's match would be one-sided. Well done. Anshuman Mohanty, I have no idea how many months Zverev will be out for. There's not really much confirmation in that yet. Once we do have that update, promise you we'll let you all know. Yes, Bapatitya Karan, he is indeed a legend and he is indeed the GOAT of tennis. 22 Grand Slams, and bear in mind, he's won 2 Grand Slams this year. I mean, the Australian Open we were talking about, and there was one comment here. Yes, Ikpreet Singh says, do you think the match with Medvedev is the greatest this year for Nadal coming back and winning? Yes, I mean, he was 2 sets down. I thought for sure Medvedev had his second slam. Then from absolutely out of nowhere, Nadal, who I have dubbed a mentality monster before, ends up pulling out what is arguably one of the greatest comeback performances in recent memory. Turned the match around absolutely, He definitely was on his element after losing those first 2 games in Australia. Today, he didn't even need to move beyond 4th gear, if you're asking me. Hard lesson for Casper Ruud, or you can say a rude awakening for him. But I think he learned from this experience because obviously, first Grand Slam final, you're up against arguably the greatest tennis player ever on his favored surface. Good luck to anyone. No one is winning that match very easily. So, I think this match was never in doubt. And Shana Ghosh is asking, is Nadal one of the greatest of cross sport in general? If he plays Wimbledon, can he do the calendar slam that Djoko could do last year? I'll answer your questions because they're in 2 parts. Is Nadal one of the greatest in sport in general? Yes. If he plays Wimbledon, can he do the calendar slam? I won't put it past him simply because, he's in imperious form. He's managing his schedule. So I won't put it past him. But remember, the US Open has always been the one Grand Slam where Nadal has had the least success. So if he can actually pull that off, then, pull off a calendar slam, as well as, if you consider his previous achievements, of course, 14 Grand Slam wins in France. He's the only member of the Fab Three to have won men's singles gold in the Olympics. So he'd just be adding to that, he'd just be adding feathers to his cap. So let me take this one question. Hosen Mia saying, what about Indian tennis players? We answered that in yesterday's live. I do not wish to go over it again because it's a very complicated and depressing subject in so many ways. Indian tennis is not in the best of places right now because one of our best stars is 42 years old. That's all I'll say on that matter. And yes, form is indeed, temporary and class is indeed permanent. I do agree with you, Love Rami. Shubham, to answer your question, I am a Roger Federer fan, but I have never once had any sort of problems when it comes to Rafael Nadal. Because as we know, both him and Roger have like a very respectful rivalry. So I think that kind of transcends with their fan bases as well. So nothing against, and of course, being a sports journalist, you always are looking for and you always recognize game. So it doesn't matter who you support, but it is impossible to not salute Rafael Nadal for the kind of accomplishments that he's had in his career and the kind of things that he still is doing. And yes, Shanak, Djokovic can indeed overtake Rafa. I'm not denying that, but you also have to remember that there is a new generation of tennis that's cropping up. Will they allow Djokovic to just run roughshod and win all Grand Slams? I'm not so sure about that. So, but today isn't about Djokovic, it's not about Federer, it's not about anything else. Yes, it's not about anyone else, it's about Rafael Nadal. Piyush, yes, I know he has 2 Olympic golds, but I was referring to the fact that of the top 3, he's the only one to have won a singles gold, remember? But, so obviously I do take your point in that regard though. And of course, man of the moment today, Rafael Nadal, it can't be anyone else. What a man, what an absolute legend of the sport. and he's just cementing his legacy at this point. We already had many have dubbed him the greatest of all time with very good reason, but he's just he's absolutely continuing to just rack up French Open wins like it's no one's business. And I think at this point it would be very hard for anyone to dethrone him unless he has an off day, and he doesn't really have off days because I can tell you this. I grew up watching Nadal, and physically right now he's a very different player, but he can still churn out victories. He still knows how to win, and that's a very dangerous thing. So congratulations, Rafael Nadal, 22 Grand Slam wins, 14 of them in France alone. At this point, I think you could pretty much just call this the Rafa Nadal Open, and I don't think anyone would be that upset about it. So I'm calling it quits for now. Thank you all for joining me in this little discussion of ours. I hope you enjoyed it. If I missed out your questions, do leave me a comment below. We'll get back to you on that. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget, if you want the latest of all sports updates from around the world, don't forget to tune in to us at Sports Today. As always, I'm Shane Rice, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye. And don't forget to download the AajTak app. Yeah? Thank you very much. Bye-bye.